And that must have been it. Well, welcome indeed. Food, glorious food. What would we give for a little extra bit more? That's all that we live for. Why should we be fated to do nothing but brood on food, magical food, wonderful food, marvelous food, fabulous food, beautiful food, glorious food? Well, in his chapter on seculosity, David Zahl said that much of the moralism and anxiety that once surrounded the bedroom as being glorious now focuses on the kitchen. And we today are going to talk about food. In fact, we are going to talk about the way we used to talk about sex. I mean, let's be honest. The last time you used the word cheat, for example, was it in reference to a broken marriage vow or something you ate? How many hands? Was it something you ate? Saul was right, just recently, right, something I ate, yes. Yes, that piece of pie just was there, exactly. And he goes on to say, David Zahl goes on to say that the shift actually is relatively recent. Because if you go back, and if your grandparents are alive and they remember, and their generation didn't talk about food the way that our generation does. And so it's hard to fathom. In their minds, food was great, but it was fuel, so you could go and get the job done, and it was something to sustain you. But it wasn't all of this incredible gloriousness that we are giving to food these days. You know, they may have witnessed the health food crazies of the 1970s, I remember those, and watched Julia Child, right, on PBS, the French chef. But nothing could have prepared them for this full-fledged religion that we have today that centers around food. Today, we have a foodie culture. And it concerns itself with the most natural ingredients. So it's good if you can grow your own herbs and vegetables. It looks at designer oils. Remember when you just had Crisco, for heaven's sakes? I mean, I can remember that. And it was lard. You had to melt it, right? Right? We've got a couple here who remember that, exactly. But now you have designer oils. I remember picking up some oil that was a fig-infused oil, and it sat in my cupboard for 4 years, so I don't think it's any good anymore. But I thought to at the time it was so good, and I thought, oh, I want to use this. Never did. And there are questions about what olive oil is best. Is it VOO or EVOO? And then when you get into the robust and flavored brands, but then there's coconut oil or almond oil that fries at a higher temperature. So, I mean, you can use it for different things. And then you have the meat. Or in the foodie culture, they call it what? Protein. Protein, right. Protein. Is it farm-raised, wild, or a free-ranged grain, or grass-fed? The list could go on and on and on concerning every element of food, even down to the stoves, the pots and pans, the knives and utensils that you use, the grocery stores that you shop at. You know, I always love to go in Winn-Dixie, because if you see someone from St. Mark's, you know, they go, oh, and they duck down another aisle. But I'm going to tell you, Winn-Dixie has the best fried chicken around, just saying. Just saying. You know, or is it Whole Foods? When I lived in Pennsylvania, I cannot tell you I am such a Publix nut. And now that the COVID virus is here, I don't even go in it, but I have someone who will shop for me, so praise God for that. But they had something called Golden Eagle, and it was a Publix wannabe, it really was, and they could never just get right there, you know, never could. So, and then we get to the actual food. It is so seductive and so dizzying at the same time. And, all of this foodie culture promises to make us better cooks. And if we become a better cook, our status is elevated in whatever culture, whatever group we are in. We know how to cook. We know how to bake. We can make a souffle and it doesn't fall down, right? And our family and friends are in awe. And then there are the celebrity chefs, the Julia Childs, James Beard, Bobby Flay, Anna Garten, Guy Fieri, Polly Hollywood, Kat Cora, to name just a sliver of a few that are online these days with shows like Chopped, Iron Chef, Beat Bobby Flay, that's one of my favorites, Top Chef, and then of course the newbie on the thing, which is everybody is emulating these days, the Great British Baking Show. Love that show. Don't watch it on an empty stomach, just telling you. And now we have 24-hour networks who are all devoted to food. We have the Food Channel, and there are a couple of others out there. And if you're like me and David Zoll, we are watching more cooking-related television these days than non-cooking related television. And let's be honest, it's fascinating, and you learn something. It's informative, and it encourages the everyday cook to try new spices, new food, new ways of cooking, For instance, dragon fruit. I had never seen the inside of dragon fruit, and somebody hacked it open, and they were telling all about it, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, now I know what I can use that for. But I'd never buy it in Publix. I saw it and went, oh, I don't know. So it's informative. It's formative. It has become invested, unfortunately, in the meanings of life. Food now expresses the symbolic values that we have. It absorbs spiritual energies of the educated class, and it's invested with the meaning of life. And it is a path to salvation for self and humanity. That's a lot for food, don't you think? That's a lot. But that's how we're beginning to view it. I wondered about the whole educated thing, and I was asking a couple of folks who for whatever reason, decided not to go on and do advanced degrees. And they just looked at me like, well, what do you mean? And does anyone remember the Redneck Cookbook from way back? Or it might be the Roadkill Cookbook or something of that nature. I mean, it was very similar. We had, those are those wonderful old recipes that our parents made. Or they're still making them. And, praise God, somebody is remembering that culture. But however, you look at how we converse about food, it becomes evident that the subject of food is soaked in religious language. Religious terms that are given to food. The fast. Who ever thought about fasting growing up, right? Nobody thought. The monks did those. The religious communities did that, the fast. But now there's a cleanse, which is basically you drink this lemonade and cayenne pepper, and I've tried it before, and yes, it does. It will cleanse you. And don't go anywhere, stay right at home. Just telling you, And then now there's a diet that is all about fasting and how many times you fast, how many times a week. If you're a certain body build, you need to fast maybe 16 hours a day every day of the week. If you're not, you might want to try 8 hours every other day. I mean, it goes on. And if you're a real seasoned faster, you're probably starving to death. That's all I can think, So there's a whole bunch of things. And then it goes without saying that foodies, that their cure is found not in a church. Their inspiration is found not in the church. Where is it found? At Publix, at Whole Foods, in the grocery store, or the farmer's market. because Lakeside is the best place for tomatoes, I've been told. If you find the right ingredient or the set ingredients, you can become who you were meant to be, whatever that may be. Stick with the wrong ones, though. Stick with the wrong ones, and you only have yourself to blame for your own unhappiness, because you did not rise above the fray and pick those right ingredients. And as Zoll says, all who are lost need only pledge adherence to the one true diet that promises a new self and enlightened understanding and abundant life. For there is little difference today between aspirational eating and aspirational living. I pondered about that for a little bit, and then I realized a couple of years ago when I decided to do no sugar whatsoever, I discovered a whole new palette of taste that I had never tasted before because sugar was blocking that out. And I got to be a bit smug, I was going to say. You know, all of a sudden I was enjoying wine and cheese and different things that I never particularly liked. And so I can understand that. You know, I felt above the fray or whatever. And then, of course, you know, 6 months later, that donut just won. And there was a downward spiral. It was bad. In fact, we talk about terms of good and bad, right and wrong. And we use what we eat to judge ourselves. Well, I'm not eating that tonight. I'm being good. You ever hear someone say that? I'm not having dessert tonight, I'm being good. Really? Well, good for you. I'm glad you're being good. Are you being good in other things, I want to ask, but I never do. Or being bad. You know, oh, I ate a brownie, I was so bad today. These are words that have come out of my mouth. I'm sure they've come out of every single one of your mouths. At the same time, we also feel loved for our food choices. It used to be that if you knew someone, you knew what they liked to eat. Today, if you know someone, you know what they cannot eat, their food allergies and any dietary stipulations, and if they're on a diet of some sort. We've also gotten very particular of how we order our food if we go into a restaurant. If these days we're not, a lot of us, but still, even so. And perhaps some of you will remember the movie When Harry Met Sally. Remember that? Now, y'all are all going to that one particular segment in the thing, but I'm going to back you up a little bit because this is when she's ordering something, okay? And I'm not going to play it for you, but she's trying to order. And I'm going to read it for you. The waitress says, well, what can I get you? And Harry says, I'll have number 3. And Sally starts off well. She says, I'd like a chef salad, please, with the oil and vinegar on the side. Everybody orders everything on the side these days. And that's fine, but then she goes further. And the apple pie a la mode. But I'd like the pie heated, and I don't want the ice cream on top. I want it on the side. And I'd like strawberry instead of vanilla if you have it. If not, then no ice cream, just whipped cream, but only if it's real. If it's out of a can, then nothing. And the waitress, who is sort of stunned at all of these instructions, says, not even the pie? And Sally says, no, just the pie, but then not heated. Well, guess what? If I'm a waitress, I'm going to give her, right? You know? And the waitress just goes, uh-huh, uh-huh. Well, Sally's intensely particular way of ordering food is just how I like it. You know, it's the way I want it, it's the way I like it, is a running joke in the film. And as annoying it can be, in the end, Harry finds it endearing. In fact, he even mentions it when he confesses his love for Sally on New Year's Eve 12 years later, saying, I love that it takes you an hour and a half to order a sandwich. Perhaps then it should come as no surprise that given the value of how now what we place on food, meals have come to function for many of us as a daily, sometimes hourly drama of discipline, deprivation, and self-satisfaction, or conversely, indulgence and guilt. If we made a bad choice in ordering, well, that's okay. We can atone for it tomorrow, you know. And for those who get caught up in the seculosity of food, diet is not just what we put in our mouths. It has become a meticulous score sheet of personal and social righteousness, the measure by which we determine our own value and other people's. Isn't that sad? But when we get right down to it, it's all gluttony. It is all gluttony. And what we're describing, in fact, I think what seculosity is all about is gluttony. And I'm veering from Zoll at this moment because I want to bring C.S. Lewis into this. I've been doing teaching on C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, and he has this wonderful description about gluttony. Because when you think of gluttony, what do you think of? Some ginormous person just stuffing whatever in their mouth, right? That's what we're most familiar with. And that's the gluttony of excess. And there you see it right there. But there's something else. There's the gluttony of delicacy. And that's what you see over there. Same sin, believe it or not. The gluttony of delicacy, this form is not characterized by overeating, but by demanding at all cost that food be prepared in a certain manner, like Sally. Or the idea that the only way something can be prepared is this way. Oh, I remember when Mother, how come they can't make, Dover sole anymore? How come they can't do this the way it used to be? That is gluttony of delicacy. The I know what I like. And it's just as deadly as the gluttony of excess. And it's considered to be excessive self-denial, especially in the guise of eating more healthfully. So I want y'all to remember gluttony as we continue on through the food, because it truly, that's a problem these days. Zoll goes on to describe a condition called orthorexia. There are many eating disorders, and I'm really surprised he didn't pick up on a few others, because when I worked as a nurse down in Altamont Springs, we had an eating disorder unit, and it was so sad to go up and see these beautiful women who hated themselves so much that they couldn't eat anything. But orthorexia, and it begins with orthorexia, it begins with an innocent attempt to eat more healthy. So it's a little bit different than some of the anorexics that we hear about. And it ends with a fixation on food quality and purity. Every day is a chance to eat right and to be good, to rise above the others in dietary prowess, and then self-punish if temptation wins. And the self-punishment usually takes place in stricter eating, fasts, or even exercise. Self-esteem becomes wrapped up in the purity of orthorexics' diets, and they sometimes feel superior to others regarding their food intake. This obsessive parsing of which foods are good and which are bad means they often end up malnourished. And even if they remain healthy, eating becomes so stressful that their personal relationships come under pressure and they end up social isolating themselves. And you're welcome to take, he says, Google vegan YouTube drama. He said there's a whole thing about that, which speaks to this particular orthorexia. At the same time, you don't have to suffer from a diagnosable disorder to be familiar with the self-obsession that results when we monitor our diet too closely. If you've ever been on a diet, you know this well. We are bombarded daily with ads, with programs, and even with medical guidelines, all to help us fight the dreaded enemy, fat. Fat. We all battle it, by the way, every single one of us, some longer than others. You know, I was confessed that it wasn't until I was middle-aged in my 50s that the middle-age spread occurred on my own body, and I began to look more seriously at what I was putting in my mouth. I mean, where once all I had to do was think about 5 pounds and boom, it was gone, you know? I was thin most of my life. And then, you know, I never thought this would happen. I never thought this would happen to me. Guess what? It does. And so now I discover it's daggum hard to get rid of it if you can. I'm not sure one can. And the message remains clear. You know, if you eat better, that is healthy, your body will feel better and you will live longer. And if you are fat, you're going to shorten your lifespan. And I will tell you, there is certainly some evidence to that effect, as well as if you binge on sugar and carbs and other untold things, for example, if you binge on anything, heart disease and diabetes can and will develop. Nonetheless, it's interesting how we have been taught about being considered fat. Zoll cites Lindy West, a self-described fat person, and what she says flies in the face of the cultural commandment of thinness, that is cultural righteousness, which, by the way, this thinness has been driven by the fashion industry. So you see fashion and food all sort of go together. And I thought what she had to say was really relevant. She says this: the way that we are taught to think about fatness is that fat is not a permanent state. You're just a thin person who's failing consistently for your whole life. So it's actually okay to say, I am fat. And I have been, as long as I can remember, fat. So I don't know why I live in this imaginary future where someday I'm going to be thin. You're just a thin person who's failing. Oh, how awful to view it that way. And while it's nice that people can accept themselves for who they are, how many of us were uncomfortable by her statement? I was when I read it. It's actually okay to say I'm fat? Ooh, I don't know, you know? You know, weightism. Weightism is a natural byproduct of a culture that has absolutized food and eating. It's a world engorged on the performancism that is wired for performance, proving, and perfectionism altogether, that cannot distinguish between the number on the scale and the person standing on it. How many of us dread the scale? Yep. How many of us get on it every morning? Yep. You know, how does it make us feel? Yeah. Oh, good, you know. It was a good day. I lost a pound. It was a good day, you know. But this is the thing, is that we have a tendency, the person who's standing on that scale doesn't use themselves as a number and not as a true person. It's a problem. Well, what about food and religion? Food has always been linked to religion. Kosher laws in Judaism and Islam. Hindus, of course, do not eat what? Cows, right? Okay. The New Testament mentions food everywhere. Jesus liked to eat, let's be honest. He was always sitting down to the table with someone. And he ministered to people over meals. It's a time of gathering. The Eucharist, the breaking bread and sipping wine, form the heart of weekly worship for many. And right now it's a drop of wine on a wafer. But one day we dream, but one day we will be back. We will be back. Nonetheless, the innovation of the last 20 years is to make food a religion unto itself. And Zoll has several theories as to why this has happened. First off, food is tempting as a religious object because of the control it affords, whether it be over our bodies or more often than not, our emotions. Question here, when you're going to sell the house, what fragrance needs to be in the house where people will like it better? Apple pie. Bacon cookies, that's right. Anything that makes you feel like what? Home, right. Food, yes. Comfort food equals hearty cuisine equals emotional reward. When you're down, don't you want mac and cheese? Yeah, mac and cheese. Ice cream is another one, mac and cheese. It really depends on all of us, whatever our comfort food was growing up. And food can represent a sincere attempt to meet a core need, the need for love. And as Christians, where do we need to find that core need? In food? No, that just makes us feel better for a moment, but of course, in Christ. And thus, it can also be misused to reinforce perceived lovelessness. For example, those who resist meals in order to punish themselves make themselves look as bad as they feel. Have you ever seen someone who's on a cleanse or on a diet of that nature? They have this pinched look about them, They don't feel vibrant. You don't see that. Second, there's a moral appeal. In the vacuum left by the decline of faith and religion, we crave some area in our life where terms like good and bad still apply, and where we can agree on a meaning. So in other words, if I put two steaks in front of you, you can probably agree as to whether one of them is well cooked and the other is cooked poorly, right? We probably all would agree. Or maybe not steak. Let's think of something. A cookie that isn't done. One that is crisp and the other that is barely done. We can all agree when one has been cooked well and the other not, okay? And let me find where I am. We can generally agree on that. And the seculosity of food allows public discourse where objectivity is still alive to thrive, and where moral categories have not been explained away by some sort of context. It implies a sense of order, food does, security, and control. When you go out and you talk with a homeless person, the first thing you do is what? Feed them. Why? Because they're not going to listen to you until that core value, until they're not hungry anymore and they feel safe and secure. They're not going to listen to you, okay? Feed them. Feed them. Finally, food is tempting because it has ties to morality. We believe that if we eat the right things, we will live longer and with a higher quality of life. And while there is certainly nutritional science that supports this reasoning, if there is any merit to those fashionable theories that cast all religion as an attempt to deal with our finitude, then food would play an increasingly important role as the plausibility of God diminishes across our culture. We don't need God, we just eat the right thing and we're going to live forever. We have a tendency deep in our minds to think that way. If I eat more vegetables than I do, exercise comes into that also, you know. But we have a tendency, it promises longer life if we eat all of those veggies. The problem is people with impeccable eating habits die all the time, you know, and glutton can live long in our life. People who are tremendously fat are in good shape, some of them. You just don't understand why, you know. Robert Capon wrote that the last secret of the cult of nutrition, the mystery to be guarded at all cost, is the implicit promise of immortality is actual bunk, just bunk. The food idol in the innermost sanctum isn't even there. It's empty. It's an empty promise. And what we seek to control usually ends up controlling us. Are we what we eat? Paul gives a wonderful example of one of his boys eating all the clementines, and he says, you eat all of those and you'll turn into one, and the answer is no. No, of course not. Even young children know this. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, said, food will not bring us close to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. To Paul, food did not occupy a place of ultimate importance. We are not what we eat. And brothers and sisters, that is good news. Indeed, Jesus himself reminded us that it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what? What comes out of the mouth. That's right. That's what defiles us. And in the New Testament, we see Jesus constantly eating with or feeding people. Jesus loved to eat. The food itself may not have been the point per se, but the people at the table were. And when people sat down together with Jesus, he didn't relate to his fellow diners according to their shameful failures or unbearable successes at controlling their cravings. He didn't deliver a pep talk or the benefits of courageous self-acceptance either. Their appetites were for love and hope, for absolution, and maybe for a little bread. But word has it, no one walked away hungry. Amen. Next week, Seculosity of Parenting by Tom. So go in peace and eat.